The final whistle cut through Briar Creek. Like a funeral bell nobody wanted to ring. When the coal mine closed its gates for the last time, the sound echoed off hollow storefronts and empty houses, bouncing through streets where children used to play and neighbors used to wave. Most families had already gone, chasing work to cities with names they could barely pronounce. But one family stayed. The McKinnons watched their neighbors pack U-Hauls and make promises to visit that everyone knew they wouldn't keep. They stood on their porch as Briar Creek bled out, one moving truck at a time, until they were the only ones left to turn off the lights. What makes someone hold on when the entire world has moved on? Drop a comment if you've ever felt connected to a place everyone else had forgotten. Briar Creek wasn't always a ghost story waiting to happen. There was a time when Friday nights meant packed bleachers at the high school football field, when Main Street smelled like fresh bread from the bakery and motor oil from garage. The coal mine ran 3 shifts, and men came up from the darkness with blackened faces and full lunch pails, proud of the work that bent their backs and fed their families. This was a town built on stubbornness and cold dust, where generations stayed because leaving felt like betrayal. But coal towns don't die all at once. They bleed slowly. First, the younger families left, the ones with college degrees and children who'd never seen the inside of a mine. Then the businesses followed, one by one. The movie theater went dark in 2008. The grocery store closed in 2011, forcing folks to drive 40 minutes for milk and eggs. The school consolidated with the next county over in 2014, and suddenly the hallways that once rang with lockers, slamming, and teenage laughter stood silent as tombs. By the time the mine announced its closure, Briar Creek's population had dropped from 2,000 to barely 200. Houses sagged under the weight of neglect. Porches rotted. Gardens turned wild. The playground swings hung motionless, tangled in vines that climbed higher every season. This was Appalachia stripped to its bones. Stubborn hills holding on to stubborn people who held on to stubborn hope, even when hope had packed its bags years ago. The geography itself seemed to mourn. The mountains that had once felt protective now felt like walls, keeping the town trapped in amber while the rest of the world rushed forward. Briar Creek became a place where memories outlived the present, where the past felt more real than the empty streets outside your window. But 3 people refused to let Briar Creek become just another ghost story. Roy McKinnon was a second-generation miner with hands that told stories his mouth never would. Scars crossed his palms like a road map of every close call. Every moment the mountain reminded him who was really in charge down there. His father had worked the same mine, and his grandfather before that. When people asked Roy why he stayed after the closure, he'd just shrug and say the valley was in his blood. But it was more than that. Roy's identity lived 300 feet underground, in the darkness where men became brothers, and every shift was a bet against the mountain. Without the mine, who was he? Just a man waving at freight trains that didn't stop anymore. Every Sunday, Roy walked the mine entrance with his father's old hard hat tucked under his arm. He'd sit on the steps where workers used to gather before dawn shifts, and he'd talk to ghosts. He'd tell them about the weather, about Dora's latest pie experiments, about Drew's basketball shots getting better. He'd apologize for not keeping the place alive. Then he'd walk home, shoulders a little heavier than when he left. Dora McKinnon ran the cafe on Main Street, though calling it running was generous. Most days, she baked pies for customers who existed only in memory. Apple crumb on Mondays, cherry on Wednesdays, pecan on Fridays, because that's what miners wanted before the weekend. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and coffee, a warm pocket of normalcy in a town turning cold. But Dora wasn't just baking, she was documenting. Her notebook bulged with newspaper clippings about coal strikes and union fights, handwritten recipes passed down from her grandmother, stories her regulars used to tell over eggs and toast. She was building an archive of grit, preserving the dignity of people who worked themselves to dust and never complained about it. Dora understood something Roy couldn't quite put into words. They weren't staying for the town. They were staying for the people who'd already left, who'd died, who'd poured their lives into this place and deserved to be remembered as more than a statistic about Appalachian decline. Then there was Drew, their 8th grade son, shooting basketball alone under skies, so wide they made him feel insignificant. No classmates. No teammates. Just him, the hoop, and the sound of the ball echoing off empty buildings. Drew was too young to remember Briar Creek's glory days, but old enough to mourn them anyway. He'd inherited his parents' stubbornness, without inheriting their certainty. So Drew started writing. He wandered through abandoned lots with a journal, describing things before they disappeared completely. The pharmacy with prescription bottles still lined up on dusty shelves. The barbershop with magazines from 2012. Hairstyles that looked like artifacts from another civilization. The elementary school where alphabet letters still clung to walls above empty desks. He photographed everything. The mural peeling off brick. The swing set strangled by vines. The stop sign reeled with bullet holes from bored teenagers who'd moved away years ago. Drew's question haunted him. What does it mean to inherit a ghost town? What do you do with memories that aren't even yours? At dinner. The McKinnons didn't talk about leaving. They talked about small victories. Dora's perfect pie crust. Roy fixing the porch railing. Drew's new journal entry. They loved each other through ritual, through staying, through the simple act of keeping lights on when darkness wanted to swallow everything whole. Has your family ever held on to something everyone said to let go? Share your story below. The McKinnons built their days around routines that defied the emptiness pressing in from all sides. Roy woke at 5:30, muscle memory from decades of mind shifts. He'd shovel the porch even when no one walked past. He'd wave at freight trains that used to stop for coal, but now thundered through without slowing, carrying goods to places that still mattered. The engineers never waved back. Dora opened a cafe at 7, brewing coffee that only she would drink. The smell drifted down Main Street, mixing with dust and the faint diesel exhaust from passing trucks on the highway above town. She'd roll pie dough while listening to old country radio, stations that still played songs about hard work and harder living. The pies cooled on windowsills like offerings to gods who'd stopped listening. But she kept baking, because stopping felt like surrender. Afternoons belonged to Drew's explorations. He'd wander through buildings his parents once knew as living, breathing places. The hardware store where Roy's father bought nails and told jokes. The salon where Dora got her hair done before prom. The diner that served breakfast around the clock for miners coming off graveyard shifts. Now they were museums of absence, filled with objects that had outlived their purpose. Drew photographed everything. A cash register with a drawer hanging open. A calendar frozen on March 2019. A child's jacket hanging on a hook, waiting for someone who'd never return. He posted the images online with captions that felt like prayers. This mattered. These people existed. This place was loved. The silence in Briar Creek had weight and texture. No school bell marking the hours. No car horns or barking dogs, or neighbors calling to each other across yards. No Friday night lights or Sunday church bells. Just wind moving through broken windows, making sounds like the town was breathing its last. The only rhythm left was Drew's basketball. Dribble, shoot, swish. Dribble, shoot, clang. The sound traveled for miles across the empty valley, a heartbeat in a body that had flatlined years ago. Roy never asked his family why they stayed, and they never asked him. They already knew. Someone had to witness the end. Someone had to sit with Briar Creek in its final days, the way you'd sit with a dying relative, holding their hand and telling them it's okay to go. These small acts, the waving, the baking, the photographing, they were vigils, sacred and necessary. And then spring arrived, carrying news that even the most stubborn couldn't ignore. The town meeting happened in the old community center, a building that once hosted wedding receptions and Christmas pageants, and union votes that determined whether families ate or starved. Now it hosted 5 people sitting in metal chairs that squeaked against the linoleum floor. Roy, Dora, Drew, and 2 county officials who looked uncomfortable, like they'd drawn the short straw for delivering bad news. The taller official cleared his throat and used words like consolidation of services and economic viability and regional efficiency. What he meant was simple. The post office was closing. Briar Creek would no longer have a mailing address. On paper, officially, the town would cease to exist. Roy sat perfectly still, jaw clenched, hat in his lap. He'd known this was coming the way you know winter's coming. Inevitable, just a matter of when. Dora's hand covered her mouth, eyes wet but refusing to spill over. Losing the cafe hurt. Losing the town's identity was something else entirely, something that hollowed you out from the inside. Drew scribbled furiously in his journal, his handwriting getting messier as the official kept talking. If he didn't write it down, would it even be real? Would anyone remember that Briar Creek fought to stay alive until the very end, that it didn't go quietly into bureaucratic obscurity? The officials finished their speech and left quickly, like witnesses fleeing an accident scene. The McKinnons sat in the empty community center as evening light slanted through dusty windows, each of them processing what no address meant. No mail delivery, no census count, no emergency services. Erased, they walked home under the Appalachian twilight. The skies streaked with pink and gold, beautiful in the way endings often are. Halfway home, Dora stopped walking. "One more year," she said. Roy nodded. "One more year." Drew looked at his parents, understanding flooding through him. They weren't staying out of hope or denial. They were staying because Briar Creek deserved witnesses for its final chapter. The town had given them everything: community, purpose, identity. The least they could do was refuse to let it die alone. "I'll write it all down," Drew said quietly. "Every bit of it." They stood together on the empty street, the last family in a town that had already become a memory, making a promise to bear witness with dignity. If this story is hitting home, drop a comment about the place that shaped you, even if it's not there anymore. Word spread in unexpected ways. Drew's journal entries, posted online with photographs of beautiful decay, found an audience. Former residents stumbled across them and wept. Journalists writing about forgotten America took notice. Within weeks, people started arriving in Briar Creek, wanting to see the last family still holding vigil. They came for different reasons. Former classmates of Roy's, now living in suburbs with manicured lawns, wanted one last look before memory became the only access point. A documentary filmmaker showed up with cameras, asking permission to record the town's final year. Drew's online followers, kids from other dying towns in West Virginia, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, made pilgrimages, finding solidarity in shared loss. Dora's Cafe opened again, briefly and unexpectedly. She brewed coffee and served pie to strangers who weren't really strangers at all. They were people who understood what it meant to love a place the world had given up on. Conversations flowed like the cafe had never closed. Stories spilling out about fathers who died in the mine, mothers who stretched food stamps into miracles, children who left and carried guilt like stones in their pockets. Roy led informal tours to the mine entrance, telling stories his father had told him about the cave-in of '62 that trapped 12 men for 36 hours, about the Union strikes that finally got safety equipment installed, about the small rebellions, smuggled thermoses of soup, birthday cakes baked underground, Christmas lights strung in the darkness. The mountain had taken lives, but it had also built them. Drew's journal went viral in niche corners of the internet. His photographs appeared in exhibitions about rural America. Teachers assigned his entries in classes about economic displacement. Strangers sent messages. "My town is dying too. Thank you for making me feel less alone." The McKinnons had thought they were the only ones grieving. Turns out, the world was full of people from places like Briar Creek, towns with names like Colwood and Harlan and Mingo, all bleeding the same slow death. Their witness gave others permission to mourn, too, to say out loud that something precious had been lost, and pretending otherwise was a lie. By the time autumn returned, they understood something crucial. Home isn't the buildings. It isn't the mine or the cafe or the basketball hoop or the houses slowly collapsing into themselves. Home isn't even the people still there, because eventually everyone leaves or dies, and the place continues in some form, even if it's just memory. Home is the act of remembering. It's the refusal to let a place become nothing, to let lives live their dissolve into statistics about unemployment and poverty and the death of the American working class. Roy understood this finally, sitting at the mine entrance one Sunday as frost gathered on the ground. He wasn't staying for the mine. He was staying for the miners, for their stories, their sacrifices, their pride in work that broke their bodies but fed their families. Someone had to hold those memories. Someone had to say their names out loud, so they didn't disappear completely. Dora's recipes were never just about food. Every pie was an act of defiance against forgetting. The women who taught her those recipes, grandmothers who survived the Depression, mothers who raised 8 kids on a minor salary. They deserved to be more than faded photographs and albums nobody opened anymore. The recipes kept them alive. The rituals mattered. Drew's journals became a time capsule. Future generations might never see Briar Creek, but they'd know it existed. They'd know the names of streets and stores, and people who made this place matter. That counted for something. That counted for everything. All over America, towns are disappearing. Not just coal towns, factory towns, farming towns, places where industries collapsed or bypassed them entirely. The people who lived there, loved there, worked there, raised children and buried parents and built lives. They were real. Their struggles mattered. Their joys mattered. They weren't just extras in someone else's story about progress leaving people behind. Home is what you make it, even when the world moves on. Sometimes home is just a choice to remember, to say, this happened here. These people existed. This mattered. And I won't let you forget. The McKinnons spent their final year in Briar Creek documenting, hosting, witnessing. They kept the lights on in the only occupied house for miles. On cold nights, they built fires, not for warmth, but as a signal, a beacon saying, someone still cares. Someone is still here. This place still matters, even in its dying. When they finally left, they didn't feel like they were abandoning Briar Creek. They felt like they'd given the gift every dying thing deserves. To be seen, to be mourned, to be remembered with love instead of pity. What's your Briar Creek? What place shaped you that the world has forgotten? Share your story in the comments. Let's make sure these places live on in memory. And if this moved you, subscribe. We're telling the stories that deserve to be remembered, one forgotten town at a time.